Hey, my name is Mike, and this is the Bored Cyborg. Welcome back to yet another episode. Today I'm bringing you guys another ranking, sort of in line with the other ranking by year videos that I've done. I started with my birth year, 88, and I've done 89 and 90, so I figured today, let's do 91. It was another really solid year for film. I've got 10 films here that I want to count down, and of course 5 honorable mentions, which basically ends up being 15. In typical fashion, I'm going to talk about each and every film and why it is on my list. But before I do, I'd love to know what your lists from 91 look like. So if you could throw together a top 10, top 5, whatever it may be, and leave it down in the comments below, I would love to read through them and maybe find out some movies from 91 that I haven't yet seen. Alright, so jumping into my honorable mentions, this is dishonorable for me to admit, but it is Point Break. And I don't own Point Break in either DVD or Blu-ray fashion, which really, really hurts my soul. It's Kathryn Bigelow's film, obviously, from 91, starring Keanu Reeves, one of my favorite actors, and Patrick Swayze, rest in peace. I had the DVD at some point, but I'm pretty sure I got rid of it because I was like, you know, the next time I watch this movie, it's going to be in HD, it's going to be on Blu-ray, and I've just yet to find the Blu-ray out in the wild. So it is what it is, but this is a heist film, again, directed by Kathryn Bigelow, that has one of the best, in terms of action scenes, has one of the best foot chases that I've ever seen on film that takes place with Keanu's character and the gang of thieves, in specific Patrick Swayze, who is Brody, and Brody, I believe that's his name, it's been a while, but Brody is a surfer who also has a gang of bank robbers that dress up in presidential masks. That's the idea of the film, and it's all about Keanu's character, Johnny Utah, can't forget that name, Johnny Utah, tracking them down, figuring it out, ingratiating himself into their surfer culture, and taking them down. But of course, with a lot of these kinds of movies where somebody goes undercover, things aren't as simple as they seem. So Point Break is my first honorable mention. Next up is Cast a Deadly Spell. This is another film I don't own, and I don't think this movie is on DVD. I'm pretty sure it's on VHS. I don't think it's on DVD or Blu-ray in this country, which is criminal. This is Martin Campbell, I want to say his first film, if not his first film, a really early Martin Campbell film. Martin Campbell, of course, would go on to do films like No Escape, GoldenEye, my favorite Bond movie. He would go on to do Mask of Zorro, the reboot of that. He would do Casino Royale, another one of my favorite Bond movies. So, Vertical Limit, bunch of movies. This guy is a big-time director that's made some of, I think, some of the most fun action-adventure movies out there. It was a TV movie for HBO starring Fred Ward. It takes place in the 40s and 50s, but it's a 40s and 50s where magic exists. Fantasy elements abound. It's very Dungeons and Dragons cross film noir. That's kind of how I describe this movie to people. And nobody has seen this movie. It is so much fun. I caught it on Prime a few years ago, and I was like, oh my god, how have I not seen this movie? Great practical effects, great just filmmaking in general, cinematography and writing and acting. Fred Ward as our lead is fantastic as usual. Guys, check out Cast a Deadly Spell. We have to get this film on DVD or Blu-ray. It is a travesty that it has not been released, especially on Blu-ray. I feel like Scream Factory would love to do something with this, or Arrow. Either way, Cast a Deadly Spell is another. Next up is The Addams Family, the rebooted film franchise from the early 90s. As a kid, I loved these movies. I adored how dark and macabre and comically gruesome they were. This and Addams Family Values, love both of them equally. Honestly, they are both on an even keel for me. I think they're both great films and great reboots. Honestly, I prefer watching these over the old show, even though I think the old show is brilliant. I love the old show, but this is sort of my generation's Addams Family, right? This is directed by Barry Sonnenfeld, who would later go on to direct the Men in Black movies. So Barry Sonnenfeld has always been one of those directors that sort of was from the camp or from the school of Tim Burton's sort of gothic dark, dreary aesthetic. I've always kind of felt that way about Barry Sonnenfeld's work. My favorite scene in the movie is Wednesday, Christina Ricci's Wednesday. The cast, by the way, Raul Julia, Angelica Houston, Christina Ricci. Christina Ricci's character Wednesday Addams and Pugsley Addams are doing a stage play at their school, and it's the most violent, wuxia-inspired, arterial spray kind of show that they're putting on. It's like an old Shakespearean play, but it's super extra violent, and it's just so funny. And I love this movie. Addams Family, another honorable mention. Next up is John Flynn's Out for Justice, Steven Seagal. At the peak of his dominance in martial arts action films. He is at his best in Out for Justice. I love Seagal's braggadocio, sort of laid-back, chill sort of character that he played in the late 80s, early 90s. It's the same character in every movie, essentially. The difference here is that he plays an Italian character named... I forget his name. Gino. Hey, Gino. He plays an Italian character, Italian cop named Gino from this small neighborhood in New York. One of his... I don't think they were buddies growing up, but they were from the same neighborhood. William Forsythe's character, again, who I forget his name, but he's just wreaking havoc in the city. He's just this criminal who just doesn't give a shit about anything. He's shooting people in broad daylight. He's just reckless. And, of course, Gino's out to tame William Forsythe's character. Tame, in other words, beat the shit out of him and kill him in the most violent fashion. But that is Out for Justice. It's just a blast from start to finish, and Seagal is a little bit cringy at points. It's like that lovable cringiness with Seagal, you know, when he's doing the Italian accent, he's like, minchia, and like things like that. It's just like, I don't know. It's a little funny. He does a fine job with it, but it's just a little bit funny to me. But Out for Justice is not funny. It is no joke. I love it. It's a hell of an action film. Resurrected. This is Resurrected, The Resurrected by Dan O'Bannon. Dan O'Bannon, you guys would know from writing the screenplay for Alien, or helping conceive the story for Alien. He would later on in the 80s, in 85, go on to do Return of the Living Dead, his directorial debut, and then he would do this, and I believe those are the only two films O'Bannon directed before he passed very early, too. I forget what it was from, but he passed. We lost him way too early. Either way, The Resurrected, which is also known as Shatterbrain, is a Lovecraftian story through and through. It's based on the strange case of Charles Dexter Ward, which is a great Lovecraft story. It stars Chris Sarandon as Charles Dexter Ward, and it's basically a story about an ancestor of this guy's character is basically possessing the body of his descendant. Chris Sarandon handles these two personalities really well in the beginning until it goes full-fledged into the ancient ancestor, the evil ancestor, possessing him almost completely. He's a recluse. He's doing all these experiments. It's got very subtle Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde things going on for sure. I'm sure Lovecraft was inspired by that. But The Resurrected has great practical effects, a great story, good lead performances. They could have been a little stronger. But the movie is fantastic. If you guys haven't seen The Resurrected, it's one of the better Lovecraftian adaptations out there. Can't recommend it enough. Great imagery. Love The Resurrected. Alright, now we're getting into my top 10 films from 1991. This one here, nostalgia definitely has something to do with. I adore this movie. I've been watching it since I was but a child, 3-4 years old, and it always gives me a chuckle. That is Ernest, Scared Stupid. The best Ernest film, in my opinion. This one and Ernest Goes to Jail, I think, are the two best Ernest films. And this is my favorite, and what I think is the best Ernest film. Of course, Ernest unleashes a demonic force on this town, inadvertently, accidentally. Ernest always gets into these sorts of shenanigans. And he unleashes the devil, or whatever, this demonic force, as well as these little demonic, like, troll things that are plaguing this town. So Ernest teams up with a group of kids to combat this demonic force. And it is a blast through and through. I absolutely love this film. It is off the wall, it is wacky, it is kooky, it doesn't make sense sometimes, but it is so much fun and has so much heart. Eartha Kitt is in this, actually, as the one who is sort of the, oh, don't go near there, it's going to unleash a curse, and Ernest is like, yeah, whatever. Eartha Kitt's great in it, but this is just such a fun movie, guys. If you don't know Ernest, if you've never heard of Ernest, or you've heard of him and never seen any Ernest movies, bust this out this October. If you have a family, even better, bust this out. But if you're by yourself, you'll still have a fun time with this movie. Jim Varney is at the top of his Ernest game here. That is Ernest Scared Stupid. Number 9 is Bill and Ted's Bogus Journey. Yes, Bill and Ted's Bogus Journey is an inferior film to Excellent Adventure. I can admit that. Excellent Adventure, I think, is one of the best films ever made. It's in my top 20 of all time. One of my personal favorites, obviously. But Bogus Journey really continues on with the hijinks of these two, Bill and Ted, just bumbling about San Dimas, California, and getting into some more fantastical goings-on than in Excellent Adventure, where it's more historical and science fiction-y. William Sadler is in this, actually, as Death, in a very Seventh Seal sort of influence. And William Sadler is one of the reasons to see this movie. The three of them just bouncing off of each other, Keanu Reeves, Alex Winter, and William Sadler, it's just brilliant, and it's just so much fun to watch. William Sadler just kind of becomes one of the bros by the end. It's just so funny. It's got one of my favorite lines ever in any movie, and I'll attempt to do it here. It's just after Bill leaves, like, the crazy, one of those crazy rooms he's in those underground tunnels with the crazy, scary bunny, and he leaves one of those rooms, and I forget the character he's talking to. Maybe it's Death, and he says something along the lines of, "That was most non-heinous." The way he delivers it, he just keeps ramping up the nons, as if saying more and more nons makes it more effective. It's the funniest fucking shit ever. I love it. I'm assuming it was improvised. If it wasn't, then that's just great writing. Bill and Ted's Bogus Journey is just a blast from start to finish. My number 8 is Silence of the Lambs. Now, I haven't seen this movie in a while, I have to admit, but what an impression this movie left on me when I was in my early teens. I saw this around 13 or 14 years old, when I was getting into more serious films, when I was becoming a man or something, I don't know. Silence of the Lambs, Jonathan Demme's masterpiece. Hannibal Lecter, obviously played by Anthony Hopkins, is one of the greatest screen villains of all time. He's only on screen for like 10 to 12 minutes, but goddamn does he leave an impression. He is creepy, he's the stuff of nightmares, and you know that argument where people are like, is Silence of the Lambs a horror film? Yes, Silence of the Lambs is a horror film. It is also a psychological thriller, but it's about a man who cunningly eats people. That's horrific. That is horror. This is a horror movie. I'm talking to you, Academy. I love Silence of the Lambs. Not much could be said about it that hasn't already been said. It is my number 8. My number 7 is another film that left a huge impression on me as a younger boy in my early teens. Again, I was a huge hip-hop fan at that point. I had been listening to hip-hop since late 90s, so probably when I was around 10 years old is when I was introduced to it, 9 or 10 years old, and ever since then I've been a huge hip-hop head. And Boys in the Hood is my number 7. Boys in the Hood is definitely a hip-hop culture film, and it's also a film about growing up as a black kid in the hood. Boys in the Hood, obviously. And so for me, this was a really great opportunity to understand, to live vicariously through these characters, to sort of try to understand and empathize with the just growing up in the projects. I didn't grow up in the projects, so it was a lens into that world, which is what hip-hop has really always been for me. It's helped me become a more empathetic person, I believe, and so did Boys in the Hood. Lawrence Fishburne as the father here. Obviously, Ice Cube is in this as one of the boys, and it's just a heartfelt story. It's a straight-up drama with some crime elements, but it's about these kids who get caught up in just the bullshit that the hood sort of permeates, growing up in the projects. And of course, each character's a little different. This Cuba Gooding Jr.'s character is sort of in the middle. Ice Cube is sort of the the wild gun, he's sort of the wild boy out of the group, and this guy's an athlete and just gets caught up. His character's so tragic, and I'm not going to talk about it too much, but they have such great chemistry. Boys in the Hood is just one of the best of its kind, one of the best crime dramas that you could ever see, and it's a true window into a world that not all of us experience. So it is important for all of those reasons. I've yet to open the Blu-ray, which means it's about time for me to rewatch this. But that is Boys in the Hood. John Singleton, one of the most underrated 90s directors, in my opinion. John Singleton directed this one, R.I.P. It's his masterpiece. My number 6 is Hook. Talking about these years from film, 88 to the early 90s, mid-90s, even into the late 90s when I get there. It's just so nostalgic talking about these movies. It's part of the reason why I love doing this and why I started at 88, because these are the movies I grew up with. These are the movies that made me who I am today, for better or worse. Hook is one of those movies that helped mold me as a child, mold my childhood. I watched this movie incessantly. Robin Williams' performance, even more so nowadays, is even more poignant, of him finding his youthful self again, finding that vigor, that youthfulness that we all have inside of us, that a lot of us let go of. That is what this story is about in a nutshell. It's about the magic of childhood and retaining that childhood and carrying it into your adult years. And I'm a firm believer that is what keeps people happy and sane, is retaining that youthfulness. I think once you let go of it, you're in for some trouble. But that philosophical argument aside, Hook, Spielberg, 91, Dustin Hoffman as Hook. This is a magical story about, of course, it's Peter Pan, but it's done with Spielberg's sort of touch and style. But it is Peter Pan in essence. It's almost a sort of a sequel to Peter Pan. It's almost as if Peter Pan, well, he did already have a bunch of adventures when he was younger, left Neverland, became an adult, forgot about Neverland in his child. You could see it's an allegory here for losing that youthfulness. And it speaks to me as a 32-year-old now. It speaks to me on a very deep and personal level, and I'm getting emotional, and I love this movie, and Robin Williams is fantastic. Smee, Bob Hoskins as Smee is fantastic. John Williams' score, oh, ba-da-dum, ba-da-dum, bum, 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 la, 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 la. I think that's Smee's theme, actually, and I just adore it. The Boogie Box used to freak me the hell out. Now I love insects and entomology, but as a kid, I did not. Hook, one of my favorites. I love Hook. Oh man, my number 5, Riki-Oh. When I discovered this movie, I don't know, 7-8 years ago now, I couldn't believe my eyes. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. I thought this was going to be like a prison action flick, sort of serious, but no, this is based on a manga, which was turned into an anime, which was turned into a film. This is a movie about Riki-Oh, a character who gets thrown into prison. I think his girlfriend was pushed to suicide because of some criminal sort of goings-on. But Riki-Oh's thrown into prison for killing the people responsible for his girlfriend's suicide. And it's basically just him. It's like a prison drama with a whole bunch of over-the-top martial arts action. It's him trying to just keep to his own stoically, sort of in prison, but all of the other inmates aren't letting him live peacefully and letting him just live out his sentence, and so he starts punching literal holes through people's abdomens in full, practical, beautiful, gory glory. This is always my, people want to get into, wacky Chinese cinema. Start with Riki-Oh. It's directed by one of my favorite directors, actually, from Hong Kong that nobody really talks about. He's got 5 different names. Lam Nai Choi. Let's see what what it says on Nam Nai Choi. Lam Nai Choi is another one. There are a bunch of them. Lam Nai Choi is usually what I refer to him as because it's the one I remember. It's the one I've retained. Lam Nai Choi. One of the best Hong Kong directors of the 80s in terms of genre films, hands down, and early 90s. Ghost Snatchers, such a fun movie. Peacock King, I've done a review for, one of my earlier reviews, take heed. Just so, and of course Riccio is the one he's known for. It's his masterpiece. But I plan to do a video sort of talking about the rest of this director's films, because he is truly an underrated director, and his films need to have wider releases. Saga of the Phoenix is another one. Just great, great movies. So much fun. Check out Riccio if you haven't seen it. It is a blast. And I usually watch films in their native language for the most part, like when I rewatch them, but the English dub on this is so much fun that I find myself going back to that over and over. It adds to the zaniness, to the kookiness, to the surrealness. Riccio is one of the best ever. I love it. My number 4, Wes Craven, People Under the Stairs. This one even made my top 10 horror films of the 90s that I did last October. People Under the Stairs is one of the most underrated horror films ever. Definitely of the 90s. I think this is one of Wes Craven's best. I mean, top 3 to 5, honestly. Nightmare, Scream, People Under the Stairs. He has so many great films, right? But I think this is one of his best, honestly. It follows a young boy named Fool who gets roped into basically attempting to rob this affluent couple's house. Ving Rhames is in this as sort of the older cat of the neighborhood who's leading Fool down the wrong path. And Fool is small, so he gets into the home and he's able to find out where the goods are. And of course, shit hits the fan. Mommy and Daddy come home, played by the actor and actress from Twin Peaks. They play Mommy and Daddy in two of the most badass, scary characters of the 90s. And they have this home that they lure people in this way, essentially. I don't want to give away too much, but then once somebody's in the house, they lock it down and they throw them in their dungeon. And hence the People Under the Stairs. Now, there's some real fucked up shit going on with this couple. I'm not going to divulge. Check out this movie if you haven't seen it. People Under the Stairs is phenomenal. It also is a film that deals with the economic troubles of living in the projects and growing up as a black youth. It deals with these issues not unlike Boys in the Hood, but in a more horror fashion. And I really love this movie so much. It's one of my favorites, honestly, and one of my favorite Wes Craven. People Under the Stairs. Now, my number 3 is heavily nostalgic. You guys know my channel. It's a lot of nostalgia on my channel, and I totally understand and recognize how nostalgia influences my rankings, but that's what makes it my ranking. I could watch this film every day, every single day, and still feel like a kid. Is it as good as the original? No. But I think it's a damn fine sequel, and that is Turtles 2: Secret of the Ooze. Secret of the Ooze is the one I watched the most as a kid because it wasn't as dark as the first one. It was more fun for a kid, I thought. Like the scene where Mikey's like, where do I put the quarter in? Like things like that. I always thought that was so cool. The giant dandelions I thought were so awesome. Toka and Razor, of course. Vanilla Ice. I mean, all of these things as a kid were just like, ah! Now, this film is also very, very close to my heart because it was the first movie I saw in theaters with my mom and my dad. My sister, she was born, but I don't think she came because she was even younger than I was. But I remember this movie. I have glimpses of this movie, seeing it on the big screen when I was 3 or 4 years old. It's probably around 4. I'm assuming this movie came out in the summer. But it left an impression on me when I was 3 or 4 years old and still remember seeing this in the theater. It was the first movie I saw in theaters, and it has stuck with me ever since. I have such a fun time with this movie to this day. It's not as well done technically. It's not as good as the original. It's not as deep. It shaves away some of the seriousness in turn for more fun, and I love it for that. The score is fantastic, as just like the first one is. I love Turtles 2: Secret of the Ooze. Man, I get emotional talking about these movies because they're so personal and close to my heart. That is Secret of the Ooze. My number 2 is one of my favorite Jackie Chan films. That is Armor of God 2: Operation Condor, or as it's known in this country, Operation Condor, which is the sequel to Operation Condor 2. It's so confusing. So, in America, on the set, This is the way that they were released. 1, 2. But in Hong Kong, this is the first film, and this is the sequel. So when they were released in America, it was billed as the original one being a prequel to the one that we got in 91. Very confusing stuff. I'm trying to articulate it as best as possible. Either way, the one I'm talking about here is from 91. That is Armor of God 2. Or, as we know it in America, Operation Condor. Either way, I love this movie to death. This is truly the Jackie Chan Indiana Jones movie. It's a simple setup, simple story about Jackie trying to find some hidden gold, some Nazi gold that was buried underneath the Sahara Desert. So that's sort of the impetus for the adventure. It has all of the adventure of Indiana Jones and all of the mystique. Maybe not all of it, okay? I'm giving it a little bit more credit than I should maybe. But it has the martial arts, the action set pieces that are just so much fun and utilize props, of course, like Jackie Chan does so damn well. But there's a lot of great prop usage in this. And it's a globe-trotting sort of adventure story. It's kind of all over the place. It feels very multi-ethnic, very multinational, which I love about a lot of the stuff from the mid-80s and to the 90s that Jackie was doing. Every one of his films just has a national feel to it, and I love that. And that's why I think it's okay that a lot of his films are overdubbed in sort of the Italian way of doing things from back in the day. I love the chemistry between the two female leads in this and Jackie's character. They are all having so much fun with this movie, and it just bleeds through the screen. I love Operation Condor, aka Armor of God 2. God, it gets so confusing. Either way, that is Jackie Chan's Armor of God 2. And my number one, of course, is Terminator 2. Just did a video talking about the Terminator films where I ranked all of them. Terminator 2 was my number 2. Terminator 1 is still my favorite, but honestly, it's like apples and oranges, man. They are just two sides of the same coin, in my opinion. This movie blew me away as a kid. Check out my video of my Christmas memories with T2. I have a video on my channel where I talk about my memories discovering this movie back in the early to mid-90s. It was early to mid-90s. And what sort of impression it left on me. Long story short, I found this at a Christmas party when I was very bored at this party when I was a kid. Went down to the basement, found this sealed on VHS. I had never seen the original, popped it in, mind was blown. It's stuck with me ever since. I prefer the theatrical version of this movie, and I don't feel like I need to go into it too deeply because I did recently in my Terminator ranking video, so check that out as well. But top to bottom, everything about this movie is perfection. Technically, the direction, the performances, Edward Furlong is perfect and organic. Linda Hamilton is complex and just nuanced and just tremendous in her role. Arnie is back just as our hero, which is such a change from the original film, which was so bold to make the antagonist of the original film the protagonist of the new one. And the way they build up to it and set it up as if the audience doesn't really know what the Terminator's deal is, the T-800 in this case. It's just filmmaking 101. It's just perfect action filmmaking, some of the best action set pieces of all time. James Cameron's T2 is my number one. I just want to thank you guys for checking out my top 10 plus 5 honorable mentions from 1991. It was a really solid year for genre film, as you could see. Even for dramas, I have a drama in there as well, which is unlike me, I know. Loved doing this list, guys. I love doing these lists. They're so nostalgic and give me the opportunity to really gush about these movies that I adore, that I grew up with, and that I want to share with all of you. So I encourage you to check out any of these that you haven't seen that seem interesting to you. I'd love to know what your top 10 from 1991 looks like, so feel free to leave that down in the comments below, and we could get a little discussion rolling. If you enjoyed this video, feel free to give it a thumbs up, and if you're new to the channel and want to see more videos like it, go ahead and hit the subscribe button, as well as the little bell for notifications. Anyway, guys, I will see you next time. Bored Cyborg is out.